Hello everybody, welcome to the October 6th Conformance Project meeting. This meeting is being recorded to the cloud and you can watch it later on YouTube. And I am your host, Rian Kleinhans. And we adhere to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, which means being the most excellent self towards everybody in the meeting. And we have a fairly thin attendance, but as thin agenda. So let's start with the first point on the agenda, API service status lifecycle test. Stephen, would you like to take the lead on that?
The current issue is Jordan's pointed out because the test is using some RBAC as part of the initial setup that and as now RBAC is no longer available for conformance, that we need to address it. So pretty much the current tack is that I'll strip the setup so that it doesn't have any RBAC components, and hopefully we'll be able to see whether or not we can still have the same results for changing the server status endpoints.
Okay,
yeah,
good. So your next step is just chopping out RBAC and see how it goes.
Yeah, is remove hasty. The current RBAC components in the setup just need to be stripped out, and then we'll see if the test is able to be a little bit more simpler, as Jordan has requested.
All right, well that would make sense. With RBAC, we're actually getting to that point later in the meeting. Good, thanks for that.
As it is not considered part of conformance.
Yeah.
All right, that is now actioned.
Thank you, Stephen. And then the next point also going to roll over to you. Limit API server proxy redirects. I know you did a lot of work for us on that to get a unit test in sorting that out. So you want to tell us a little about that.
Stephen, as well, on the need agreement on the way forward or LTM approval, where we've just noted, yes, we noted it, but do we need to get some LGTM or approve on this forward, or go ahead and just do the removal and then?
Yeah. It needs the strip out before we redo LGTM on it.
Right, so why don't we do that here? Say we'll just actually take the note, put it in here, as a paste. This is not an easy way. I'm not sure how to use it. We're just going to put a link to this comment.
Oh, the 3 dots on the right. Happy. Back.
3 dots on the right of that.
Yeah, and by the emoji, and then you can copy a link directly.
Oh yeah, you can also do. So what I do is I click on the link,
okay.
And then you Control L, and then it gets your thing, and then I Control C, and then I paste it.
Okay,
here.
Sorry.
Oh, it's all good. It's like learning all the fun ways. And that's the
There's
comment.
Multiple
That's
ways
the
of doing
actual.
it.
Yeah. And we can just actually turn this one to comment added. Apple K. Add a paste the link. Awesome.
Thank you for that.
Just making sure we're real clear.
And that's clear, and that's
agreement. Yep, cool.
That should get us properly to get it back on the agenda the next meeting in a month's time. And the next one is very exciting. The proxy redirects and the unit test for that. You want to roll with that as well, Stephen?
Yeah. So if we switch across to the files changed. So the tag here was to create a separate function that will encapsulate the redirect component from the original upgrade aware Go file. So we can now if we go down a little bit, there is the it got removed, and then I've added in a check so that we'll do a return if proxy redirect becomes true. And I've gone through and done a test with Kind and API Snoop, and everything's good. And the unit test here is going through and checking on get, head, put, and delete. And for the head and get, it does come back with a 301 is what's expected. So in the actual
301,
yeah, 301. So those are the expected results. So further down in the actual code, help me a little bit further up. Yeah, so once we set up the new request based on the test method and pass, we'll be able to then look at doing a check to see whether or not a redirect is going to go through, and then we check the response back from the headers on 11.17. So, and then we'll be able to get the status code and also check the headers below that as well if we've got a 301. If it's a 200, there's no headers that have been written, so there's no way to check the path at this stage in this part of the code block that we're testing. But back in the conversation at the top, I've still got to it's close to the very bottom. There is
Sorry, I hit the wrong key.
There is some manual tests that I did a little bit further up. Yeah, and a little bit further up. So, so these manual curl tests that I did historically, I've gone through those manually, and they're all exactly producing the same sort of results that I'd expect. So probably the only issue here is doing a follow-up with Jordan to see if he's all happy with it.
We'll ping him today.
Yeah.
Cool. We need approval, and then this is all underpinning unit testing so that we can move forward with an actual conformance test worth 7 points.
Actually, we'll unlock 14.
Unlock 14 points. Yay.
So the first bit is for doing the 7 points for the pod endpoints, and then there'll be another 7 that will be for service as well. So that gets the 14 in total.
That's very exciting. We only have 75 to go, so we'll finally be able to define a larger range of what Kubernetes is. Any further thoughts on limit API server proxy redirects?
No, that's pretty much all.
Rian, you're soft muted in Zoom.
Sorry for that. That is really nice. As we don't have Jordan in the meeting, and he was our key advocate and supporter for this, maybe it would be a good thing if we reach out in Slack after the meeting and say, can we please have your eyes? And this would help us unlock.
Sorry, Clayton?
No, Jordan. Jordan Liggett. Because he gave a lot of feedback already on it.
Also, I think there were push changes, and maybe there was an issue with the bot not removing the prior approve or something. Was that?
Yeah, that was Clayton did an approve, but the bot never hasn't.
So a separate AI is reach out to SIG testing regarding this PR having changes pushed and the approve not being removed. So we'll leave that on Stephen.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks, Stephen.
Voluntold.
All right, which brings us, is there anything else on that you want to mention, Stephen, or can I roll on to the next point?
Yeah, there's nothing else at this stage.
Beautiful work, thanks. Then ineligible endpoints YAML has been updated. We added the RBAC endpoint in that PR there. That takes us down to less than 75 endpoints of conformance testing to be done.
Hey, it merged 23 days ago.
Yep, it's merged in and it is off the list.
I'm excited to see that.
So yeah, that moved things forward. And yeah, less than 75 to go. So
we meet once a month now.
mm-hmm.
We used to meet every week.
2 weeks.
Every 2
Bi-week.
weeks.
Bi-weekly,
like,
yeah.
Why isn't this on the list? Okay.
Good. So that is all from, I think, from our side. And then Sergey, welcome to the meeting. Nice having you. If you can roll with your point.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring some awareness and ask some feedback since you have a lot of experience with conformance tests, and it may be useful for not conformance as well. Yeah, so this is a document. We have, SIG node tests are, there are a lot of tests in SIG nodes, and there is like cluster tests, and there is a node test as well. So there is a little bit of difference how we run things. And in the past, I don't know the history exactly, but I know in the past somebody created new tags for node tests, and tags were node feature and node conformance. I believe the long-term goal was to roll out node conformance into some form of conformance tests, mostly to conform not distros of Kubernetes, but rather runtimes that Kubernetes is run against. So to make sure that if you supply a node and configure a node, this node is conformant with all the behaviors that we promise to our customers. So let's say runtime can can properly set up all the storage, or runtime can give you all the proper metrics that required by Kubernetes. So that was the idea of node conformance, and the name conformance was picked, which I believe a little bit a controversial decision, because conformance has a very particular meaning in Kubernetes, and but it is what it is. Like, we may need to rename it to something else, but this is not a point of what I wanted to bring up today. So I wanted to clarify how we use node conformance today, and I think we need to document it in test infra. So node conformance today will, with this proposal, will indicate that the functionalities that is covered by the test supposed to be working on all distros of Kubernetes and all runtimes. So if you run with containerd, or you run with CRI-O, or you run with other runtime, it's supposed to be working. And node conformance, and if it doesn't work on all distros, or it doesn't work on all runtimes, then we will use a flag feature that will indicate that this is a subset of functionalities that doesn't work everywhere. And if it's work for you, you can test this feature for your environment or for your node, for your distribution and such. So yeah, so it's kind of test can either be node conformance, or it can be marked as feature. There is no alternative for you. So this is a proposal that we're running on, and this raised a little bit of interesting questions. First question we had and we discussed is how to deal with beta features. You may know that today feature gate is going through the stages, from alpha to beta to deprecated or GA.
That's right.
And there is a section of node conformance if you want to scroll all the way. when feature gate is in alpha is disabled, but when it go to beta, it started being enabled. So practically what we see is that all the Kubernetes installations have all the beta feature enabled.
Yeah.
This is typical pattern. And let's say we have some features that recently were added that overrides termination grace period for probes.
Right.
So with this feature, it's still in beta, but it's enabled almost everywhere, like virtually everywhere with a new version of Kubernetes. And we don't want to mark it as feature because we wanted this feature to be actively tested. So we want to mark it as not conformance. The proposal is that even for beta feature gates, for beta functionality, we still will apply not conformance tag. And I was wondering, like, how like, I know conformance is not the same way. Conformance only applicable when feature is in GA, right? So I was wondering if this was ever a question, like, was it ever discussed, like how?
It's
Yeah,
understanding
any thoughts about it?
why we conform at the different areas, right? And I think for the conformance program itself for providers, we're trying to make sure that the surface area available to orchestrate basically the Kubernetes API server and everything behind it is the surface area of concern. And that creates its own ecosystem of, don't say that it's Kubernetes, really, not conformant Kubernetes, without going through those procedures and submitting something. With, if I were to simplify this, for the CRI, for the container runtime interface, which is a little, this is more than that, right? Node conformance is kind of the behavior of, yes, the CRI, and also the control, the surface area behind kubelet, right? So it's kubelet.
Yeah, that's right. It's more than CRI.
Plus the CRI, and having that, because again, with conformance, what we're trying to do in the other area is say you could completely rewrite it in Rust, and that's from a different surface area. And so you, in thinking of what it looks like to have a conformant kubelet API interface that's standardized regardless of the underlying CRI implementation or plumbing or all the things, like it's being really, really clear about what we're trying to make conformant, and determining the amount of surface area that's available to change and ensure that the behaviors are consistent. And if I were to ask you, what is the complete and clearly defined surface area that you would expect for a node conformance approach to take, where is that defined?
Yeah, and there is no definition whatsoever, and that's why not conformance is not the best name. It's not I mean, it's same by intention. Intention is to say, no, even by intention is not the same. Intention is to say that, like, every installation will behave this way and will implement this kind of functionality, this set of functionalities. Yeah, we don't intend to, like, replace runtime or anything like that. We're just saying that all runtimes needs to work this way, and we work this way with runtimes. So please
what is that surface
behave the
area?
same way.
How much of that is CRI, and how much of that is kubelet? And is there a way to specifically look at, for example, the Swagger / OpenAPI spec for the kubelet interface to have a surface area to look at, including all of the methods and objects behind those methods, in the same way of looking at something for the CRI runtime and looking at those surface areas? So where do the current set of, in this case, I'm guessing they're in the Kubernetes tests EDE folder?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And this is not specified. And my question is more like, was it ever a request to have conformance for beta APIs or for beta features?
No.
Okay.
So the thing is, as you get to the what's globally depended on, initially there was only 9% of the Kubernetes API that had any sort of tests. And all of a sudden, we've got all these people in the world depending on this functioning in this way. And so we said, well, maybe we should have a formal definition of what this is. So our expectations can be met and shared. And so that's when, actually, since we're on storytelling mode for a moment, if you go over to IINZ, there's a fun story over back on, because this is all very relevant to the journey. I think it's under blog. Back in the DanCon. So Dan, it's a great story here around the relationships and the definition. But as in 2017, we were in Germany, and Ken Omichi was looking in the logs and said, "There's not so many tests." And Dan said, "Well, we got to define what this is real good." So he shared his screen on what was on his disk. This is Dan's disk. For what storage, and it's just the visualization of that, and that's where we came up with what would be API Snoop. And Zach did some things and some test writing, which this is Steven here, and we got through to have this initial definition by 115. And you'll notice it's always focused on the green, because at that point it's not only enabled by default and has been enabled by default, it is an absolute expectation to be generally available, which is why we call it GA versus something else. Beta means it can be turned off and is not expected to be everywhere. So if you go to API Snoop, the first page of that is actually showing alpha, beta, and stable. So you could click on those to see what's there. And I think for us, what it allows us to do is start having those conversations. Hey, welcome to the API. You're going to be alpha for a bit. You might change. We may never see you again, and that's fine. We're not going to depend on you, but we're going to make sure we know what the surface area looks like, and there's not conformance tests that hit those things. Because if we limit to only show conformance eligible, then it's always going to be just stable. That big checkbox right there is what you're kind of asking. Like, do we do beta? No. And
okay,
but I think it's important to understand, like, because of the feature and what you're expecting from your audience, in this case, is from your runtimes, you kind of want them to be figured out a little earlier than beta. And we actually had I forget, was it a couple of years ago, Rian, where we, in the conformance group, were trying to figure out how do we, because we have the information to collect, if we could go ahead as part of the conformance program, have people run a bunch of tests to see for those beta APIs enabled. They wouldn't be part of conformance. You'd still get your shiny badge and say, absolutely, for the generally available things for the whole world, you pass. But how did you do for these things that are in beta? And having that report available to make informed decisions, one, about the number of adoption, because it is optional. How many companies turned that particular beta thing off? Because that may mean that either it conflicted with that thing. It's a bit, and it's obviously a forced, an encouraged submission from, in this case, you're talking about the CRI runtime, kubelet, this combination of things that comes from, and that's why I don't really know who your audience is with that. Like, who would run these conformance tests? Is it just part of the general CI system for CI signal? To go, hey, we've noticed that these various runtimes are in with the beta, because then it actually gets into, it's less important about what you call conformance and more about who you're informing that there's been variation, and that's getting involved with SIG release and you're the SIG in charge of that API, in this case SIG node, and having those. And I think that's where I'm trying to get some clarity on your beta. Like, I need to go through and read this, so I haven't looked deep at the tag thing, but I figured if we share enough of what I've just said, there may be some things that you can shine a light on for me to focus on more directly.
Yeah, it's exactly the thinking that we had regarding beta, that we need to get ready that beta will be available everywhere, and we want to make sure that it's being tested. So if you, as a company, as a platform provider, run your own set of tests, please run this test as well, because it's important to be working. You can disable it still if you disable this feature gate, but if you have it enabled, please make sure it's working. Otherwise, customers will have some troubles.
So I think it would be important. I definitely want to go through this asynchronously a little more deeply, but I think your audience for this is, well, it does have a lot of conformance information. I think SIG architecture is probably the right audience to help you with this call, because this isn't kind of a SIG release in helping the define, but defining what we're supposed to release and that process is actually.
No, this is exactly what I'm looking for. Like
Yeah.
I will go to SIG architecture as well. I just want to get this like sense of what conformance is better. And another question I had is, does conformance test has any definition what needs to be enabled on an environment so they work? Was it ever an issue? As today, like we have some tests that supposed to be working, but they only work if you pre-install something on an environment, like runtime class. If you install this runtime class, configure it in CRI, then it will be working, like test will pass. But if you haven't configured that and functionality is not, I mean, there is nothing to test because you can only test this functionality if this thing present on your environment. Then it may be problematic for customers to know that without any.
So some of those things, if they're optional, they're not required. And conformance is for all non-optional, generally available, because this is part of, if you were to have an RFC, things in conformance are must. You cannot be called Kubernetes without this. And what you're talking about at that point is may or should. There's all these, like, go check the RFC definitions and find, I'd almost write it in that verbiage of should, and then you can have these extra things on the side that say, well, it is conformant to what is absolutely required in GA. And at beta, it's kind of like, it could. Because it could, anything at beta is always going to be could. And should is encouraged, and it's definitely on by default. And something like RBAC, for example. RBAC is not part of conformance. And we actually, like you saw earlier in the call today, where it's taken this many years to go, yeah, no, it's not. It's actually not part of the definition. But I would be hard-pressed to find a Kubernetes deployment anywhere that doesn't use RBAC. And then the same thing for ingress, right? In order for ingress to work, it's going to be some stuff. In order for storage to work, it's going to be some stuff. And it's up to SIG storage and what is SIG networking for ingress to kind of ensure that those shoulds work. But as far as the global definition of GA Kubernetes, because they're optional, they're not part of a requirement. So things like what's it called? K3s? K3s? Can do its thing in a way that's not, it's conformant. Right, but it doesn't do all of the things that you already. It's some things are missing.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I feel it's also a difference with node conformance, and another reason to not call it conformance, because what we want to express is if swap is enabled on a node, then you absolutely have to perform this way and respect this flag this way. If it's not present on a node, then you still have defined behavior, but like it doesn't involve any swap features. So this test clearly has a requirement for the environment, and not all providers will enable swap on their nodes, and like it may be an option that for them to enable or not enable. But we need to test it one way or another based on, it's still conformance for us, not conformance.
Look, I would think it's because of the overloaded wordness of conformance, I think it might be wise to choose something similar, like behaviors or node behaviors, or I just node behaviors would be good, because there's multiple behaviors. It's okay to not have these behaviors in a conformant Kubernetes distribution, but it is required if you turn on these features. And that feature flag conversation of, is this feature enabled or not, around the normal flow of SIG release, and all of that, how that's also loaded, is almost, it's similar but not the same conversation, because while the features might be enabled, it's not about the flow of that. It's about the testing of the if a node possesses this, because sometimes that's not a feature of Kubernetes, it's a feature of the node. And
ability of the node. So
ability of a node. And so there won't be a feature flag necessarily for let's use GPU, just because that's something fun that's hardware related. But we probably should, and we shouldn't require that in conformance. The definition for the global, everybody should have GPUs. But we definitely want to have a thing somewhere within SIG node that says, if there is a GPU, then let's do the GPU thing and ensure globally that across all the runtimes that piece of hardware is available to the cluster.
yeah, and if it's available, this test needs to pass.
Yep.
Okay.
And we want that part of the release cycle, so it needs to be release informing. So I think if you look through all of the SIG release flow and the and SIG testing's infrastructure underneath to help create for CI signal, and definitely those CI signal things for SIG node are probably already in place, but it's when you get to the release informing that's important. So you can actually release inform on those beta things that are a requirement for that release. Like, so I'm just throwing GPUs up there. But for that, and having that conversation with SIG release, SIG architecture, and creating those CI jobs that are release informing, that do block us moving forwards, because they're important, but they're not part of everybody defining what Kubernetes is globally. They're just ensuring that our artifacts that we produce as a community do what they say they're going to do.
Yeah, and I think many things already done right in Kubernetes. I mean, it's we already have release blocking tests there, and like it just some cleanup and documentation needed, because we see more and more confusion as people implement new functionalities. I'm even afraid to call it feature, because feature is also such an overloaded term.
Behaviors is nice, right?
Behaviors are good,
is
yeah.
not loaded, and I think even if other people used it again in a different way in that context, behaviors is fuzzy enough to get reused and not have too much connotation associated with it.
Yeah, thank you for feedback, and
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a pretty lonely. We often think of what the conformance team and II do as washing the dishes in the Kubernetes community. They all got to get done, but sometimes you just got to have some staff on call to keep the kitchen clean, keep stuff flowing, and we're absolutely happy to serve and support in any way we can.
I don't think about it as dishes for sure. I mean, if you work on dishes, I work on dishes all my day long. So.
Fair. It's some technical dishes, but you know, we welcome anybody to come alongside and wash with us. Like I don't know if I'm, because I got my screen sharing. Yeah, if you look at this fun chart, like that's the chart. But if we go to actually API Snoop, and you look at there's a big drop down for which releases to look at, and they're all in order here. And I'm super proud to see, like, look at this thing. It's all filled in, particularly for, let's go and just show conformance, right? So that's really filled in. There's not that much to go. Oh my gosh, we're at 81%?
Yep.
That's awesome.
That's
from that merge about the RBAC getting out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
Snap.
Look at all the small amount
week.
of holes left.
But let's check this out. If we go switch release and we go back to the earliest, we start measuring at 115. Give it a second to load that data. Come on. Demo day always fails. Let's reload that page. Try one more time.
While that's loading, Sajid, you know, SIG Arch meeting is tomorrow at I think 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. Pacific. So if you care to join that.
I'm gonna try one more time to load that API Snoop page. It's fun to see that early release stuff. Come on. Let it load.
Yeah, I see it at 11 a.m. Pacific. Maybe it's time.
I think that's New Zealand time.
Well, welcome to we'll be there tomorrow as well, so you're welcome to join us there.
Thank you.
At 119 over here, you can see that we had 166 endpoints there's no test at all. And then there's new endpoints promoted, so they added all this extra debt extra debt. We finally got a hold on added extra debt somewhere around 115. A couple of one would slip through now and then, but not too bad. Oops, who's this? Let's get these. Who's this? Delete core v1 namespace service.
That relates to Tim did some cleanup
right.
and there's an endpoint that's
No,
still through.
it's something that we'll have to swing around to later in the release.
But we're down to freaking 74 endpoints left after, and because it got up to this highest point was 226 for the releases. And if we look at the coverage over there, we're slowly going back in time and getting rid of all the debt. Like we're still working on 111, and I can't click on these, but we know about what those APIs are by looking at that front page. We should open a ticket with Zach and don't let him do it, but pair with him on figuring why these older things aren't there, because it's part of a good story. And I think I have to, actually, we should get on it pretty quick because I have to present to KubeCon China video. So.
It was working. I updated episode. I've seen this weekend. It was working when I updated it. So it could be that it's just running slow today. There's
all
the man.
good. So so glad you were here. Let us know how we can be your advocate for the SIG Arch meeting tomorrow. I will be sure and read through this today, and so that I have it fully in my head for our conversation with. I would encourage you to bring this on the agenda for SIG Arch tomorrow if you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks.
Yep. To get more feedback, send an email to the SIG Arch mailing list asking for this to be on the agenda, and then add it to the agenda, and then drop it into the SIG Arch Slack. The way to amplify your voice is to make sure that it's in all of the channels of SIG Arch mailing list, SIG Arch thing, and on the meeting. And since you're about 24 hours before the meeting, it's an excellent time to do that.
Okay, I will do it after this meeting. Thanks for advice.
Yep. See you. Have a good one.
Thanks, Cedric. Thanks for joining us. And that is the conclusion of our meeting. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.